Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Horses Advocate podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you listening and finding out what I feel is important for all horse owners throughout the world to pay attention to. And to do that, I attend meetings because I want to hear what other people are saying about equine nutrition or dentistry or any other aspect of equine health. But today I want to focus on some meetings that I attended that was called the Equa Summit, which is brought to you by Kemin, which is a company that makes ingredients for different feeds. So it's huge. It's not just horses, it's all animals. And they put on this conference specifically for those who are interested in what's going on in horses. And it consisted of 6 presentations. And honestly, I tried to listen to them all, but many of them just fell so short of giving us really good quality information. So let me go over a couple of them. The first was feed form and its impact on equine health. And that was presented by Dr. Randall Raub, who is the Director of Research and Nutrition at Kent Nutrition Group. So not only is he representing a food company, which already induces a bias into the presentation, but he also owns his own feed company that makes an extruded feed. So he's talking about how good extruded feeds are for all our horses. And he threw out a lot of information that at surface level seemed to make sense. And I thought it was very interesting about the digestibility of foods and in their forms. And we have pelleted foods, we have whole grains, and we have this extruded, which is something that goes through a machine that pressurizes it and extrudes it out, kind of like a meat grinder. And I really can't bring you a lot of good information out of this because nowhere in there do they say that grains may not be that healthy for horses or the supplements they put into these grains. They just talk about the absorption of the materials that's in the food. And if you talk about energy flow or flux, that's the food that comes in and how it's used to the horse's body and finally excreted. And that excretion is basically carbon dioxide and water. And there's processes along there that use the materials in a correct fashion. And the digestive tract from the mouth to the anus in all species, or pardon me, all creatures, if you will, has a pace that it goes through. It's like an assembly line where the food comes into the stomach and then it's pre-digested and goes in the small intestines and certain things are drawn out there. And then it moves into the gut. More things are drawn out there. And then it finally goes into the rectum and expelled. And as the nutrients are brought out, the fuels and the structural proteins are brought out from the food and introduced into the body. Through the processes, they're blown off as carbon dioxide and water. And how fast it goes through will make a difference. Now, it is intuitively obvious that if something comes in and moves through that faster, there's less time to pull out these nutrients. And as far as I'm concerned, the easier you make food to digest does not equal it being more efficient. So this whole process of turning the food into something other than a natural state is the antithesis of what I believe. But this man believes it, and he had some really good information about it from his perspective. So that was fine. The next one was Inside Out Tracking Equine Ulcers. And that was from Dr. Jamie Nichols, Director of Nutrition at Blue Bonnet. And I believe she is a PhD. So is Dr. Randall Raub, a PhD. And she was talking about the creation of ulcers in the stomach, not too much talking about colonic ulcers. And it's interesting because I'm at the AAP meeting right now, which is the American Association of Equine Practitioners, where they've talked a lot about equine ulcers. And the one thing that is missing from this person's, Dr. Nichols' presentation, in the AAP meeting presentation is they're not talking about the root cause of it, which is a dysbiosis or an altered microbiome of certain parts of the digestive tract. So we need to understand that you need to get to the root cause and eliminate it if you want to get rid of gastric ulcers, because in an evolutionary perspective, there's no reason to have this disease if everything's going right. This is a symbol, as all diseases are, of a disruption of the normal flow of energy through the horse's body. And that affects not just the horse, but all the bacteria in there trying to survive with the horse and to make both lives better. And that relationship is often overlooked. We are constantly looking at just the horse and not the microbiome. Although it's touched on many times, nobody really looks at this as being the root cause of most problems in the horse. So she's talking about tackling equine ulcers using food. And I hear so many presentations about foods and supplements and medicines and very little. And I wasn't disappointed here. Obviously, she represents Blue Bonnet and Kemin Feeds. And so they want you to buy their foods. So that, to me, was a waste of my time. But it's really good to know that they're not really addressing the issues. And we are here. So thank you for being here. The third was from Dr. Claire Tunis, who Dr. Claire is a PhD in nutrition, and she runs her own company called Clarity Equine Nutrition. And she is on a podcast called Scoop and Scale, which I occasionally listen to. Big shout out to Claire. She and I have talked before at the AAP conference. I'm here at the AAP conference, and I don't see her here this year because I think a lot of people realize that that's a waste of time because veterinarians are so shut down to any ideas about equine nutrition. Yet the big boys are here, Purina, Nutrina. I don't have my badge here, but I have a lanyard, and the lanyard, of course, says Nutrina on it. Huge company. Anyway, she talked about heat stress and its impact on gut health. And I thought that was a really good presentation because she lives in Arizona, and they were saying that they had extreme heat for long periods of time, and that affected the gut health of all the horses. No doubt, any kind of environmental stress, you live in a crowded city, or a crowded boarding stable, if you're a horse, if you are exposed to drought and there's no water, for instance, if you're exposed to pollution where the air quality is so poor that you're having trouble getting good air, either airflow or quality of air coming in. And she chose heat stress as being an environmental stressor that affects the gut. And that was excellent. You must combat heat exhaustion. And here in South Florida, we have extreme heat too, but it's very moist heat. And it's very hard to get the horse cool. And you end up having non-sweating issues, and the horse is breathing rapidly, trying to get air in because he can't cool himself any other way. And it's on us to make sure that the horse gets cool, either by fans with water or constant baths or a pond that they can go into. I've seen horses in ponds with just their nose and top of their face exposed. They're just so hot just to cool themselves. And it's very hard. In the southern areas of the United States, Southwest, they have more dry heat. And that can also just cause more and more evaporation occur. So you end up with dehydration. Anyway, Dr. Claire addressed a lot of these issues, and I thought she did an outstanding job because the gut health is impacted by heat. I personally would think that if you took your hay and soaked it and provided that forage, which is good for the horse, and it was in a soaked form, so they got more hydration through that, and instead of the dry hay that's going to absorb water, it's going to give water in this case, is probably going to help a lot of horses. The next one was leaky gut syndrome in horses, real disorder or red herring. This is presented by Dr. Wendy Pearson, Associate Professor of Equine Physiology at the University of Guelph. And she went into the anatomy of the gut lining, which has specific cells that are glued together in what are called tight junctions. And she talked about whether this leaky gut syndrome is truly an issue in horses or if it's something that we don't really need to watch. And I thought it was a fascinating, gosh, how do I say this? Approach to looking at leaky gut. So my position is that leaky gut does occur, that seed oils are probably at the root of it. And I've been saying this for years, and I find it fascinating that all of a sudden you look on social media or you check in with incoming political structure here in the United States with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming forward and saying we need to eliminate seed oils. Well, if you've been with a horse's advocate for any length of time, you've known that I've talked about seed oils and how they bind to lipopolysaccharides, and that can leak through these gut linings and get into human joints and cause pain, joint aches. And eliminating seed oils will eliminate your joint aches, not just in you, but in the horses, because 30-year-old horses that eliminate seed oils start running around the paddock because they don't have any more joint pain. It's really cool to understand. Anyway, I think she left us thinking that it's mostly a red herring, that it really isn't a big deal. But that's not really accurate. She said it is something that is real, but it could be misguiding us and that there are other issues going on. And I agree. I think we have to look at a lot of other things that are going on, but that's what Wendy Pearson from University of Guelph who is studying this. The next was the microbiome. What does it mean for immunity? And this is Dr. Liz Schatz, Senior Specialist of Veterinary Affairs at SmartPack, and she is a veterinarian. And it's so funny because I saw her at the SmartPack thing here at the AAP convention. I didn't talk to her, but it was so interesting to see her live versus on here. What bothered me the most about Dr. Schatz's presentation was in the Q&A afterwards, she was asked multiple questions, and at least 4 times she says, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. And in fact, that was a theme through a lot of these presentations. We don't have the data, and we don't really know the answers to any of this, which I thought was fascinating. So I basically didn't do much on the microbiome as far as taking notes, because we do know that there's a direct effect between the microbiome and the vagal nerve that transmits messages from the stomach up to the brain and back again. And that's related to how healthy the gut microbiome is. We also know that it depends on who you listen to. 70, 80, 90% of our immune system, the horse's immune system, is located in the gut, which makes sense because we're putting all this stuff from the environment down that tube that's running through us, and it's trying to get through that tube into the horse's body. And that's where we need a strong defense mechanism to prevent that from occurring. And she was basically saying that the gut microbiome has a role in that. Well, I think it has a tremendous role, because if you have bad bacteria, they're also going to try to enter the gut, and our immune system has to fight that. So if you have the wrong foods going in and you create a lot of inflammation is going to be combated with inflammatory tools out of our immune system. And whether it's acute or chronic will determine how bad that reaction is going to be in our gut. So her talk was interesting, but I couldn't bring myself to take many notes, because what she was saying was either already known or I believe was really not accurate. But she works for SmartPack, and SmartPack's whole goal is to sell you supplements that improve your gut health. And I'm saying, stop adding things, start taking things away. And that's going to improve your gut health better than anything. Start feeding the horse the way horses should be fed, which is ancestral and is based on evolution. So they have survived millions of years by eating just ground plants and a variety of them. And I find that the holistic medicine group will come in with other plants to treat certain things, which is exactly what the horse does. So I didn't give that presentation much credit. The last one was nutritional management that's critical for gut health. That was by Dr. Robert Bray, consulting nutritionist for Star Milling Company. And maybe I'm wrong. Now that I'm looking at this, I may have confused Dr. Randall Rabb. I don't think he's the one who had the personal company. I think it was Dr. Robert Bray who has the personal company. I don't know. It doesn't matter. They all are representing food for horses in some way or another. And they're all talking about feeding the horse using things other than ground plants, other than just hay, which is disturbing because these people have grains to sell and supplements to sell, and I'm their antithesis. And frankly, I don't think I'll ever listen to Equus Summit again from Kemin Equine. They were sponsored by Triple Crown, Blue Bonnet, Sentinel, Smart Pack, LMF Feeds, and Elk Grove Milling Inc. Stable Mix. And that's not what we need, folks. We need people with good science, people who will tell us exactly what needs to be done to make our horses healthier and happier. So let me switch over now because I am at where are we? Go away. Here we are. I am at the American Association of Equine Practitioners Conference on horse health. And they have a huge vendor section that you can spend hours in, get lost, and talk to all sorts of people. And there are a couple of things. First to note, the keynote speaker was Dr. Rick Lesser, who I knew when he was a year ahead of me at Cornell. And we would go to Horse Bowl together, which were 4-H students who were trying to compete against each other to express what their knowledge was with horses. I thought that was really cool. And he is now an ordained Catholic minister, left equine practice several years ago due to the loss of his wife, sudden death of his wife. And he's raised his children and sold his practice. And he basically said some really interesting things, but one of which was find a purpose outside of yourself. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm just, for a living, I work on horses' teeth, but my passion is being here, teaching, helping you understand how horses work and how to make them live better and thrive in a human world. And I thought I was right on track with that. He also said, be humble. And I have written right here, this is not about me, it's about the message. And I have that in my car, I have it on my iPad, I have it everywhere to remind myself that I don't care if you never remember my name, but if you get the message out that horses need to thrive in a human world, and there's certain things that we need to do, and there's certain things that we need to avoid to make them better, that's important. So I was really, really, I really liked his keynote speech. The other one was the Frank J. Milne State-of-the-Art Lecture. And this year is Dr. Lisa Fortier, who I knew as a resident at Cornell. I knew her. I used to make faces at her when I was in the back row of some of our Cornell seminars. And she'd be on the front and she'd see me. I'd be making a funny face and she'd be cracking up in the middle of a very serious lecture. And she'd have to apologize and try and refocus. It was just a game I played with her. And it's so funny because that was 40 years ago. And I saw her and I reminded her of that. And the first question out of her was, so where are you sitting? I said, don't worry, you won't see me. But she gave her talk on orthobiologics, which is basically PRP, IRAP, stem cells, And she's been at the forefront of this research. She's world renowned as that researcher. She's also the editor in chief of the Journal of American Veterinary Medical Association and has revamped that. So every time I get the new journal in my mail, I'm thrilled because it is so much more full of information. Not good information, I might add, pretty lousy, but we have to work within the parameters of what we have and the monies that we have to do the research. But it's fun to listen to what she had to say. It took up the whole afternoon. There's very few Frank J. Milne state-of-the-art lectures because it's only once a year and they've only been doing it for, I can't remember, 20 years. One was Dennis Brooks, and he was on our podcast earlier. He's one of the only that's been involved with a Frank J. Milne state-of-the-art lecture and the British Equine Veterinary Medical Association's Equal Talk. So he's the only one who's been invited to both because he's such an eye expert. Dr. Divers was there. I said hello to him several times at the conference here. Really good guy. Dr. Ducharme, who's head of orthopedics head of medical surgery, soft tissue surgery at Cornell. He's been there, a great friend of mine too. So I've been honored to know several of these presenters, and I know their integrity and their humbleness is the highest. So it was fun to listen to that. But there are several things in here that are talking about teeth and about nutrition. And I don't want to get into the details of it because that'll bore you to tears. But I will tell you this, one theme that seemed to permeate all the talks that I listened to, and that was how many of the presenters basically said, okay, I understand we don't have enough horses and the study didn't last long enough. And these are some of the basic parameters to get good science. Good science is based on total numbers, or what they call the power of the study. And if you have too few and the result is too narrow, you're not going to get a good result. The best way I describe this in other messages that I put out was if you had two people, one was the control group and one was the subject of the study. And the study was, does a bullet kill you? And you took a bullet, you took a gun, one with a blank for the sham treatment or the placebo group, a blank, and you shot them and they didn't die. And the other one was a real bullet and shot it. They'd say, okay, the bullet can kill someone. Well, how many people do you have to shoot to get a determination that that's real? So that's an extreme obvious one. On the other hand, if you have such a margin of error that's so thin, like does this treatment help a horse resolve their problem? And you give the treatment and it does or it doesn't, you have to do a lot of people over a long period of time to see if this one treatment over time makes a difference, which I thought was fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating that they all admit to that they had problems. And at the root cause of that, of course, is money, because people don't have the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars it would take to have thousands of horses on a trial and watch it for 10, 20, 30 years to see what the outcomes are. For me, I think the experiment is so obvious that we didn't have grain in the 70s. And then through the 70s and 80s and 90s, grain went from here's a bag of oats to here's this complete feed that's extruded and has all these benefits. And we're seeing more and more disease brought on with all the other conditions basically staying the same. They're living in stalls, they're doing certain types of work, they are breathing the same air. So why are suddenly all these horses falling apart? And it's the reason why the Horses Advocate podcast is here. My goal is to help you understand that everything that you hear and read, including my own stuff, you should question, you should ask seriously, is this something that makes sense? Should I be listening to this? And maybe that's the title of this podcast. Should I be listening to this? Because horses are dependent on us who keep them in our care to treat them with the best evidence-based medicine, and we're just not getting any evidence-based medicine. Now, not that's of value in nutrition. I'll give you an example. There was a talk I went to about ergutaflosin, which is an SGL2 inhibitor, which basically allows glucose to be excreted from the system and thrown out in the urine, and what it does to horses. And it's a really good talk. I really like the guy, but he even admitted we don't have enough horses on this. We don't even know what the proper dose is. We're not too sure how these things actually work, but we're going to take these various blood parameters like blood glucose levels and blood insulin levels, and we're going to look at the metabolic processes. We're also going to look at some liver enzymes. And it was fascinating because the dose of 0.05 milligrams per kilograms gave you one response, but cutting that in half to 0.025 milligrams per kilogram changed the outcome. And that's like minuscule. So now we have more questions. Why is that happening? And would like 1 milligram per kilogram be better? Would it have longer lasting effects? Would it kill the horse? And nobody's done the research. But during the whole talk, there was no control group where they removed all sugar and compared the result between a horse that was being fed a low starch, low sugar diet versus a horse that's a low sugar, low carb diet and this SGL2 inhibitor or something similar to that. They're not doing that. And in no case that I listened to did they talk about exactly what the horse is being fed, which is so frustrating. They were talking about the oral glucose tolerance test, and he used 5 horses because he says, that's all I had. I had 5 horses, but we're trying to look at the results of this oral glucose tolerance test. And they're using Light syrup, LIGHT. Now, I remember when I was learning way back, it was you had to use LITE, not the LIGHT, that there's a huge difference. So I quickly looked up the difference on my search engine, and I couldn't find it. I don't know what happened to Light, LIT. But the point is, if you're really doing the oral glucose tolerance test, you have to use glucose. But they're fudging it. They're saying oral sugar tolerance test because Light syrup has fructose in it. And if you're following me at all on this, you know that fructose works completely different than glucose and has completely different actions going inside the horse's body. And in addition, if the horse is stressed, they can be converting glucose into fructose using the polyol pathway. And if that happens, how's that skewing the results? So I'm sitting in the audience sitting here saying, they're not looking at any of this. I was so pleased to think that on the screen, just for a moment, they had a list of tests that they want to take, including uric acid. But nowhere in the presentation did they discuss uric acid levels in horses. And uric acid levels in humans are incredibly important because if you have high uric acid, you get gout. You also get hypertension or high blood pressure. You get excess body fat deposition. And you get this foraging behavior that makes you aggressive out there on the interstates. And we're seeing this in horses being aggressive at food time. They're knocking their stall walls. They're attacking horses over the walls next to them, even though they know the horse isn't going to come through. And their food is all in our minds. There's your food. Nobody else is in here. Why are you fighting the horse on the other side of the wall? That's fructose that's doing that through this food aggression from foraging behavior. So I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with our profession. I'm frustrated with AAEP. I'm frustrated with the agenda-driven meetings that Kemen put on, Triple Crown, Blue Bonnet, et cetera. I'm frustrated that I go over to the trade center and the biggest advertisers there are Zoetis, which is a huge drug company, along with Merck and Boehringer Ingelheim, Nutrina, which is Cargill, which happens to own Purina in Canada, and Mars. Mars is huge. They have a huge footprint at the place, Mars Foods. They have diagnostic imaging, they have diagnostic lab results and tech. They have the two small animal clinics that you go to, Banfield and Vet Clinics of America, and they make a lot of food, including our candy bars, but they make food for horses as well. And they're just globbing onto this whole market approach to have complete control over your horse's destiny. And I find that so scary. It's like a dictatorship, and dictatorships can work provided that we are in alignment with what the dictator wants. And I obviously don't want that. I want what's best for the horse. And I don't believe anything that these people are saying. By the way, Purina in America is owned by Land O'Lakes. And while Land O'Lakes wasn't showing themselves, Purina had a big footprint here too. So the veterinarians being driven by these big companies, and the little guys, and I saw sprinkled throughout the vendor area where there are supplements everywhere. And there's a couple of supplements in there that are kind of good. I kind of like the idea of, well, I won't get into it. But anyway, the bottom line was, I don't believe in a lot of these things, but there's one company there, Succeed, who I know the owner of Succeed, John Hall, and we met up a couple of times, and we just commiserated and just talked about how frustrating it is that a lot of horse owners won't listen, won't understand what's actually going on with their horse, and that if you're going to go ahead and feed grain, add Succeed so you can mitigate some of those adverse effects, especially colonic ulcers, so you can have the horse healthier and perform better. And I keep saying to him, John, I'm trying to put you out of business. And he says, oh, go ahead. It's never going to happen because no one's going to give up feeding grain. And he gets frustrated. The veterinarians pass him and they don't understand just how devastating these products are, these grains are, and the environmental stresses are on the gut microbiome and the hindgut health and the creation of colonic ulcers. So we commiserated, and it was funny because there was a animal scientist on his team, and she and I hooked up on this thought of trying to make the horse's health the best. And I invite her in to listen or to take the basic and advanced equine nutrition course. And she's going to do that and get back to me, and hopefully she'll agree. But I said to her, do you know what the polyol pathway is? And she says, yes, I do. I'm like, nobody else knows the polyol pathway. And she says, I do. And the Randall cycle and things like that. And it's just so fun. We're dancing up and down, basically, to find somebody else who has dug deep to understand research in nutrition. So that's all I want to talk about. We've gone for about a half hour, and I've got more meetings to attend to. So thanks for spending your time with me. This is Doc T. Remember, we're here to help horses thrive in a human world, and you need to dig deep and not take everything you hear at face value, but actually ask questions and say, does this make sense or not? That's what I try and do. That's where it's got me to this point. And when you hear all the other marketing schemes, make sure that you are not being bamboozled and that you're getting good information. And remember, ask yourself and those that you're trying to talk to, how's what you're doing working for you? And if it's not, you have to change. Because if you repeat yourself, you're just going to go insane. All right, Doc T, thanks for listening. Bye. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.